Welcome to Have Your Say. I'm Anne Minicozzi.
And I'm Diana Robinson.
And today we're going to talk about, now that we're post-midterm election, talk about how all that went, what our experiences were, and also have a particular focus on the role of the judge of elections at the polling place. And we have some video footage that was recorded by several people here at Radnor Studio 21, and it covers interviews at polling places with 3 judge of elections. The first is Diane Thompson at Radnor United Methodist Church in the 7th Ward in Radnor Township. The next one is Harriet Waldron, who is at the 4th Ward Judge of Elections in Precinct 4-2. And the third one is Anna Marie Hessman, who is the Judge of Elections in Radnor Township, Ward 7, Precinct 1. And so we're going to include those interviews, so you'll be able to see those and hear what they say about being the Judge of Elections on Election Day, and then we'll be back and discuss generally what happened with the elections.
A judge of election is basically responsible for overseeing the election process. So we make sure that the rules and the laws and the regulations of voting are followed. And the goal is to make sure that every eligible voter has the right to exercise their vote.
The Judge of Elections oversees all of the operations on Election Day of fair and legal voting, responsible for coordinating staff, often coordinating with the location, and picking up and returning materials from the county courthouse and media.
It's an elected position, and we do get a small stipend for serving. If you're interested in becoming a judge, you have to let your party head know and tell them that you're interested in being on the ballot. You have to get signatures from people in your community to have your name put on the ballot, and then you just need to run and hope people vote for it.
Technically, you're nonpartisan on the day from beginning to end, and it's a nonpartisan role, but because of the way Pennsylvania law works, the parties coordinate the elections for the position. And there's a bit of a partisan, who ends up, it's kind of a check and balance of Republican versus Democrat, of, the majority inspector and the judge tend to reflect the majority registration in a precinct, and the minority inspector and clerk tend to reflect the minority registration, so Republican versus Democrat. Technically, anyone of any registration could be elected to any role.
Well, I probably have been a judge for 5 years or so. I was a committee person before that, but Delaware County holds classes and you go there. And then I learned obviously from the judge whose place I took over. It's really a training period. I mean, you have to learn how to put these machines up, and that's one of the things we do every morning at 6 o'clock so that people can vote at 7.
I had a kind of a learning by example as a machine inspector. I was signed in, appointed by the court for a machine inspector vacancy when the former judge was getting ready to retire, and we discussed it, and I was going to be on the ballot the next time the judge came up. And she walked me through how she did things, and then once I was elected, I continued to attend the free trainings in media. It's really kind of an involved training, and it's a good idea to go each time. And in fact, you're really required if you're on the election board. Many people do not, but sometimes something changes or their guidance changes for a practical reason, and it's always a good idea to check in there.
This is just one of the pieces of paperwork that has to do with voting, where if people need assistance, we document, we have them sign and document it. We have certain people assigned to help them in the voting booth. In a lot of cases, people will come in and they'll say they're inactive and they need to sign a form that says this affirmation of elector, so we had to have somebody sign that for us. And it just, those kind of things go on all day. And a lot of times I do have to call media if I can't find them at all and there's nothing, to figure out if they're in the wrong place, if they should vote for the provisional ballot, if they're not registered. So those types of things go on throughout the whole process.
The worst thing that can happen is the machine stop working. Because if the machines don't work, we really can't vote. We can't take the votes by hand. So that can really back things up, and we have to have a technician come out, and those individuals who are in line, hopefully they'll be able to wait. But that is the absolute worst thing that can happen.
One of the things we do when any voter comes in that can't reach, and we have a lot of that because we have a lot of people on walkers and in wheelchairs, is that we'll adjust the machine for them, put it lower, raise it. We can't raise it up because it usually fits most people, but if they can't reach it, we'll lower the machine so that they can vote.
All the votes get counted. It's electronically done, so when the polls close tonight, we will go through the procedure that we need to close each machine, and each machine will count the votes. And then we tally everything up, and we, have to write everything down. So it's still kind of an archaic way of doing it, but there's a machine, computer voting system, and then we as people check that system and make sure that everything gets counted. So it's like a double check, and we write all the votes down and tally everything up manually, and then we give those votes to the county and media.
This is big even for a midterm, just having that many people. We've had people out the door most of the morning. Sometimes we would be here and we'd have an hour, we'd have 2 people come in. We have not even had a chance for most people to have coffee. So it's been crazy.
I think there have been a lot of people energized from both sides of the spectrum. And I'm always happy to just see turnout and engagement, because I think it's pathetic that our turnout is often when the real decisions are being made, which is at the primary. That's when, in many cases, especially local offices that aren't that sexy, but they make a difference to your daily life significantly more than what's going on the national stage. People just don't show up, and today it's raining and it's not a presidential year. We have unusual turnout, and I think that's why it is. I think people are really engaged.
I think we're at a tipping point right now. People are fired up on one side or the other, and to them it's an issue of way of life, rights, and some people like what's happening and they're trying to protect that, and other people think we're going in the wrong direction and they want to change.
It's important, especially for women during this time, to get their voices heard, and I want to make sure that it's a tradition that I get to share this time with my baby daughter Julia, so that she knows that it's important to vote, and I'll take her every time, so that when she grows up coming to the polls, and then when she turns 18, she'll realize how important it is to vote for herself.
I think young people typically in the past have not thought that it's going to really affect them that much. It's a privilege to not have an election affect you, and we're seeing now that the decisions that politicians are making are affecting each and every one of us. As a woman, I've definitely seen the impact that laws and legislators have had on my life, so I think it's really important to get out there and make sure your voice is heard, and I don't think that you can complain on social media or say your opinions if you're not going to go out there and do something to change the environment that you're living in.
Very few people have ever been in here and been mad about anything. We really bend over backwards to try to help everybody. I think we have a good rapport with our voters. A lot of them we know. Everybody who's sitting here lives in this area. One of us knows somebody that comes in here in most cases.
I was involved in the 2008 election with Obama as a poll watcher, and I never had a problem personally voting at this particular location. Everything always went smoothly. But when I went to the other polls and I was watching, there were many instances in which people could have been turned away if someone hadn't been there to give them the knowledge that they needed, or to stand up for them and make sure that they were either looked up on books or whatever technicality that they were having, that it was worked out. And so I saw, being the judge of election, when the opportunity came, wow, this is a really important position, because you're standing in a place where you can really be the decision maker of whether someone can exercise their vote. I have to have the proper knowledge and the proper resources available and know how to use them to make sure that when someone comes into the polls and they have a question, that question is answered. So that's why I wanted to be a judge, and I think that's one of the really important things that a judge does. As a matter of fact, it's the most important thing.
Welcome back. I'm glad you were able to see that footage and that we had that support from the Radnor Studio 21 staff. Vince and Kevin went out to do those interviews, so we really appreciate that. And having perspective from 3 judges of election, which is really great. Yes. All of them coincidentally women, not on purpose, as it turned out. Mm-hmm. And just to hear about their experience working at the polling places and really setting the tone inside the polling places, I think it's really valuable. And it is an elected position as well, so it's nice to see your neighbors in your precinct where you vote being active and setting the tone in the polling place that way.
Right.
I think it's really useful.
And I think it was just great that with all the efforts that had been made prior to that about the message of getting out to vote, that the numbers were clearly up, and I thought that was great that for a midterm election that people were out. People, I know I had texted people, emailed, and folks were getting back saying, I voted already.
Good.
You know? Or if they hadn't, I'm getting ready to go vote, you know. So people, it was on everybody's mind, and people got out and voted.
Yeah.
So that was great. Great.
Yeah. Even on my block, we have an ice cream social on Memorial Day, and I hadn't written to my neighbors since then. So I was writing about some other things too, and I said, you know, remember to get out to vote. So just in all of the different ways where people could connect with each other, I really think there was such a big push this time.
Absolutely.
So how was your voting experience? Do you remember what number you were in line? Or?
Actually, let me see, I don't, but I do know when I at the time that I went, I picked a time that I figured it wouldn't be so busy, and that was kind of like maybe around 1 o'clock or so in the afternoon. But when I did go and I asked, they said, oh, the numbers are way up, we're doing really well. So I thought that was great, because I knew if that was like around 1 o'clock, we still had several hours left, and a lot of people went after work as well. And so, but I think quite a few people had gone before. I know I had encouraged folks, if they could, to go before they went to work, and so they wouldn't have to worry about getting hung up at work and, you know, not being able to get out. But so folks either did that, or as soon as they got off, they went to the polls.
Yeah.
It was great.
I did a similar thing. I tried to go at what I thought would be a quiet time, so it was about 11:30 in the morning, and there usually is a rush at lunchtime.
Right.
So I thought, well, it'll be a little bit quieter. But there were my daughter and I went, and there were about 12 or so people in line at that time.
Okay.
And then I ended up being, at least at our precinct, so this would be Harriet Waldron. They give each voter a sticker with the number, so then as you're going to the next person, they know which number it is. So they keep track of it like that, and then you can turn in your sticker.
Right.
So that helps them be organized. And I was number 565 at that time.
Oh, goodness.
And I only ever remember being in the 300s at any time, especially an off-year election or at the primary in the spring. Low numbers. So that was really high. Even for a presidential election, I don't think I was that high of a number, because I usually would vote in the morning anyway.
Okay.
So yeah, that was a big surprise.
A lot of time, yeah. But I think it was clear that folks were much more in tune with the reason why, and I know that for the NAACP, we had spent a lot of time focusing on our young people, our college students, and first-time voters, and really explaining this is why you need to get out and vote.
Yep.
So. And folks were actually asking questions, so what does this person do? What are the candidates? Because like I said, I think folks forget the little bit that we get in American history in school. And for the ones who are still in school, you still forget all of what happens and the different roles of the different candidates. And so to be able to explain that and say this is why you need to get out and vote, that these folks, are making decisions on our behalf, but is it really on our behalf if you don't get out and vote for the candidate you think is the best candidate to represent you? And then I think now the next stage is holding our elected officials accountable.
Right.
And you certainly have a right, once you voted,
Right.
to hold our candidates accountable. So.
Do you have any information on the number of millennials who voted, even locally? Anything that you've seen like that
I don't
yet?
know that yet. Probably, I'm sure it's at some point, probably before the end of the year, there will be statistics, the data that the League of Women Voters or somebody like that will have. Probably, it will be interesting to know what that number is.
Because now I think there are more younger people, millennials, I'll just use that term, than there are voters over the age of 65. So now that group is going to have much more of an influence as long as they will get out to vote. And I do know people that age who are very concerned about the issues, and I don't know that the advertising directed to millennials is very effective yet. I think that has to happen to make it more effective. And so maybe what needs to happen with that is millennials themselves, when they're getting jobs, when they finish college and so forth and get jobs, work to help make the communications more effective in the campaign process and just learning about the issues and everything.
And I think they have their own way. So you have, I think, the millennials, and then you have what's called the Gen X, I think, generation that they're talking about. And so that during the course of the time now, we actually, I was looking it up, and we actually have 6 living generations, which is probably the most at one time.
Wow.
Because folks are living longer, so that the younger generation clearly communicates differently. And so I do think that in getting them involved, they're going to be able to communicate to their peers the way they communicate. And so that's what's going to be more effective. But to also be able to have, understand the history historically and issues in the background as to how some laws and policies have come into place, I think then that's where the older generations, more senior generations, the baby boomers and all, will be able to talk about that. But the manner of communications, I agree that I think they will be better able to communicate with their peers the way they do if they understand the issues and have the right message. And so watching even in school the younger ones who aren't old enough to vote, but understanding, and I know a lot of people, grandparents took their grandkids and, that kind of thing. And so the elementary school, middle school, children got to see, and they ask questions, so I think that's good too, because the more you teach them now, once they reach the age to vote, they have a better understanding as why already. And so they would have already had those conversations and discussions. And
I always like to see when voters have children in the voting booth with them, because they're definitely absorbing it.
Right.
And they know it plants the seeds for the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's really important.
So, yes.
Another thing, I have always thought of it being a good achievement to be a super voter, and I don't see that talked about very much lately. So that's someone who votes in every election, the primary, the general, the primary, the general, and then, well, I've been a committee person before, so you would have a printout of the voters in your precinct, and then a record of not what they voted, but did they vote? So you're able to share that information. And I wonder if that would be a motivator for young people, but really everyone to consider themselves a super voter. So I know my daughter liked getting a I voted sticker on the way out of the polling place. And you had it on the rest of the day, right? And I did that too. And that idea of, oh, I am a super voter. You know,
Okay.
I am going to come out at every election.
Right.
I wonder if that's something that could be worked with, because it seemed to be, it was said more in the past, and I don't know. if
Right, and I
that's-
think in the
that would be
past,
useful.
you'll hear people who talk about, you know, oh, I didn't miss an election. I got
You
out
take
of the vote.
pride that you're
Right.
always going to be there.
Right, and I think we can promote it from the perspective of what we started this time is talking about the importance. So when people understand different elections, there are different candidates. You know, there are different positions, and all of them are important. And in discussing the why they're important, and understanding that, you know, different positions have, you know, different terms, and if you are happy, good, then you continue to vote. Whatever. If you're not happy, then you want to get out and vote to make sure that you're that person hopefully doesn't, you know, get in, because they're representing you. And I think when people get to understand, you know, if you do not vote, someone is still going to win.
Right.
Someone is still going to win that position. And so I would rather have someone that I can at least talk to. You know, we all know that everybody's not going to agree on everything, and that's fine. But at the very least, in voting for a certain candidate and saying, here's what's important to me, you know, here are the issues that are important, how do you feel about those issues? And if you reach a point where certain issues are not being adequately represented, you can have an opportunity to say, this is how I feel and the why, and hopefully change, you know, the opinion and the outlook of that particular official. But if you're not involved in the process, then you're not going to do that, which then makes for folks doing what they want.
Right, and then you're really not being represented
Right,
too. But
right.
the next natural step, leading on what you're saying, is when does someone who's a voter and maybe becomes a super voter, when do they become a candidate? So, and that might be something that we'll want to talk about, because we'll have a few more shows in the spring leading up to the primary,
Right, yes.
and we could look at that process
Right.
of
To being involved
how
in
do
that
you
process.
become a candidate, how do you
Right.
circulate your petition,
Right.
and things like that. Like, when does somebody decide, okay, now it's important to me that I'm going to run?
Right, because those who are running don't represent me.
Right.
So you know what? I represent me.
Right, and then
You know,
as a
right.
candidate, then you
Right.
decide you're going to be the one who's going to knock on the doors
Right.
and get people to come out to vote and learn more about, in addition to the issues that you're concerned about, the other issues that people
Others are concerned
feel
about,
need
yeah.
to have more of a spotlight on.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I was just thinking in the Congress now of how many women actually, and I think that was probably what led a lot of women to run.
Right.
You know, feeling that, you know, I'm not being represented.
Yeah.
So I'm reaching a point where the only way I'm going to feel represented is to run myself, you
Right.
know. And so it will be interesting, I think, to see how that plays out as to what the different dynamics will be in terms of issues,
Right.
and in particular health issues, and so things that are surrounding health issues, because when they were doing the different interests and giving percentages, you know, health was still the number one issue.
Right after we recorded the
Yes,
program, the
yes.
last program about public health and voting, I went home, and that night I saw on television nothing but discussion about the importance of health
Yes.
and voting. And I
Right.
said, oh, we're right on
Right on
target.
time,
We're right
on
on target
time.
with Have Your Say.
Right, and that it impacts everything else.
It does. It does.
That health policies do impact everything else, and so I think it was great that the message got out. People certainly seemed to take heed to that. They got out and voted. And as you say, now the next step is being able to hold folks accountable, that people do actually look and know who their elected officials are in their areas, who is representing them, maybe take time to go meet them personally, go
Right.
to their office, meet them, and
Or if they're having a town hall meeting or something like that,
Yes.
that's an opportunity where you can continue to speak up. So I guess that something that we're saying here is we're happy that everyone voted,
Yes.
but now your work can continue.
Absolutely.
Getting together with your elected officials now
Right.
and even writing letters but a town hall meeting is a really nice opportunity
it actually
to
is.
and then
yes.
you're connecting with other voters who are concerned too, which is nice.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. So, so I agree. I agree.
So we have continued homework for everyone.
Absolutely.
And as far as our show, Have Your Say, we continue to be interested in having any ideas for programs that you think we should have. If you yourself think you would like to be on and be a guest on our show, I know we're going to talk about a number of issues coming up, social
Yes.
justice issues, and then we'll switch to a strong focus on voting as we get closer to the primary in the spring, as that whole process sets up.
Right, right.
So,
But there are a number of things, like you said, between, we'll continue issues surrounding health and education and
Housing,
and housing and all
food.
of those. Yes, so they're all important. And so as we look forward to specific topics for the new year, that we've got a whole line of things that we are sure,
yep, a lot of people we know we would like to have on the show.
yes, will be interesting. And so
Good.
we just want to leave you with that understanding that the more you participate, the more you're knowledgeable about the things that take place, that your voice allows you to have your say. Thank you.
Thank you.